At the heart of Fort Bragg, a decorated colonel swung at a seemingly fragile female officer, and his arm snapped before it ever touched her. The parade ground fell silent. A blonde woman stood still, her calm eyes locked onto the man who once ruled through fear. Everyone thought she was just logistics staff, until that moment. Whispers tore through the ranks. Who was she? And how did a desk jockey bring down a living symbol of power in a single move? Fort Bragg stretched across North Carolina like a small city of concrete and discipline. American flags snapped in the morning wind, their shadows dancing across parade grounds where thousands of boots had worn grooves into the asphalt. The constant rhythm of drills echoed between barracks, punctuated by sharp commands that cut through humid air. This was where America forged its warriors, where hierarchy wasn't just respected, it was absolute. Deep within the base stood the Advanced Tactical Training Academy, a fortress within a fortress. Its modernized dojo featured mirrored walls that reflected every movement, every mistake, every moment of weakness. Surveillance cameras blinked from corners like unblinking eyes, recording everything for review and critique. Here, elite officers honed their combat skills under the watchful gaze of instructors who believed pain was the greatest teacher. The smell of sweat and rubber mats had seeped into the walls themselves, creating an atmosphere thick with testosterone and unspoken threats. Captain Harper moved through this world like a ghost. At 32, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. Her blonde hair, pulled back in a regulation bun, revealed a face that could have belonged to a suburban schoolteacher. Plain fatigues hung loose on her frame, hiding the lean muscle beneath. Most dismissed her as another washed-up veteran assigned to administrative duties after her tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. They didn't notice the faded scar across her left hand or the way her eyes went distant during morning formations, seeing sand dunes instead of concrete. "Let me help you with that," Elena said softly, kneeling beside a young cadet struggling with his gear. The private, barely 18, fumbled with straps that had tangled during the morning's obstacle course. She worked quickly, efficiently, her fingers moving with practiced ease. Remember, steady pressure, not force. Force creates resistance. The cadet nodded, grateful for help that came without humiliation. This was Elena, always teaching, never preaching. But others watched with different eyes. "Just another bleeding heart," muttered a sergeant to his companion. "Probably couldn't hack it in the field. These desk jockeys always think they know better." They laughed, not bothering to lower their voices. Elena heard but didn't react. She'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. Not yet. When have you bitten your tongue to keep the peace, even when injustice stared you in the face? Drop a comment. Sometimes staying silent takes more strength than speaking up. The Academy's culture had calcified over decades. Senior officers ruled through intimidation disguised as tradition. Complaints disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. Female officers learned to develop thick skin or transfer out. The few who stayed navigated carefully, knowing that one wrong move could end careers. Whispers of favoritism and harassment floated through the ranks like poison gas, invisible but choking. Then Colonel Marcus Vance arrived for the morning's demonstration. At 53, he embodied everything the old guard represented. His uniform stretched tight across a frame gone soft with privilege, but his presence filled rooms like smoke. Flanked by his usual entourage of yes-men, he strode through the academy doors with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences. His steel-gray eyes swept the assembled personnel with practiced disdain, categorizing each face as threat, asset, or irrelevance. Vance's reputation preceded him like a herald of doom. 3 harassment complaints, all buried. 2 female officers transferred after personality conflicts. A trail of broken careers left in his wake. each justified by performance reviews he'd written himself. The brass protected him because he produced results, or so they claimed. In truth, they protected him because he was one of them, a guardian of the old ways in a changing world. The collision was small, almost insignificant. Elena, returning equipment to the storage rack, stepped backward just as Vance rounded the corner. Their shoulders brushed, nothing more. But to a man like Vance, even accidental contact from someone beneath him was an affront. His face darkened like storm clouds gathering over the prairie. "Watch where you're going, Captain," he growled, emphasizing her rank like an insult. His eyes traveled over her nameplate, memorizing it. "Harper. You're the one who thinks she can teach combat techniques, aren't you? The desk jockey playing soldier?" "My apologies, sir," Elena replied evenly, her voice carrying no challenge, no defiance. She stepped aside, giving him more room than necessary. To observers, she appeared to shrink, another officer learning her place in the pecking order. But something in her stillness made the air feel charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. As morning drills commenced, the routine sparring sessions would soon crack the academy's carefully maintained facade. The flags outside hung heavy in the still air, waiting for wind that would inevitably come. What would you do if you were stuck between honor and survival? Comment below. The choice might be harder than you think. The demonstration began like any other. 200 personnel gathered in the main training hall, forming a perfect square around the central mat. Morning light filtered through high windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Colonel Vance stood at the center, his voice booming off the walls as he lectured about combat readiness and mental toughness. His favorite topic: how modern military had gone soft, especially with women in combat roles. "Real warriors understand hierarchy," Vance declared, his eyes scanning the crowd. "They know their capabilities and, more importantly, their limitations." His gaze found Elena standing quietly among the instructors. A smile played at the corners of his mouth, predatory and calculated. Captain Harper, front and center. Time for a practical demonstration. Elena moved forward with measured steps. Inside, memories of Fallujah flickered. Smoke, screams, the weight of command decisions that meant life or death. But her face remained neutral, almost serene. She'd played this game before in places where the stakes were bullets, not bruised egos. "Sir," she acknowledged, standing at attention on the mat. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vance announced, circling her like a shark sensing blood, "Captain Harper here represents our support personnel. Administrators. Paper pushers." He paused for effect, letting the words sink in. "Some believe everyone deserves combat training. I believe in staying in your lane. Women like Harper belong behind desks, not in command positions." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Some shifted uncomfortably, others nodded agreement. A female lieutenant near the back clenched her jaw but stayed silent. Everyone knew speaking up meant career suicide. The system protected its own, and Vance was definitely one of its own. Have you ever been in a room where everyone knew something was wrong but no one dared speak? Share your story. Collective silence can be the loudest scream. "Let's see what our desk jockey has learned," Vance continued, his voice dripping condescension. "Basic defensive stance, Captain. Show us how they taught you to stand in, where was it? Supply Corps?" He knew her record, everyone's was available, but the lie served his purpose. Truth had never been his priority. Elena assumed the stance, textbook perfect but deliberately rigid, playing the part he'd assigned her. Her hands positioned correctly, but without the fluid readiness of someone who'd actually used them. It was a performance within a performance, and only she knew which was real. As she moved, her mind cataloged details: his weight distribution, the slight favor of his left knee, the way he telegraphed aggression through his shoulders. "Pathetic," Vance spat, shoving her shoulder hard enough to break her stance. "This is why women shouldn't pretend to be warriors. You lack the instinct, the aggression, the natural ability." He turned to address the crowd, using her as a prop for his sermon. "In real combat, Hesitation kills, weakness kills, and this, he gestured dismissively at Elena, is weakness personified. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, standing among the instructors, caught Elena's eye. They'd served together briefly in Afghanistan, though she doubted he remembered the quiet intel officer who'd guided his unit through 3 ambushes. His slight headshake warned her, don't engage, don't escalate. He'd seen what happened to those who challenged Vance. But as the colonel's hand twitched, what was she holding back? You know what your problem is, Harper? Vance stepped closer, invading her space with practiced intimidation. You think those participation ribbons from your tours mean something, but I've seen your type. Hiding behind regulations, filing reports while real soldiers do the fighting. You're everything wrong with the modern military. Elena's breathing remained steady, but something shifted in her posture, subtle, almost imperceptible, like a bowstring drawing taut. The closest observers might have noticed how her weight redistributed, how her hands relaxed into something more dangerous than fists. Years of muscle memory threatened to surface, begging for release. But she held back, letting him paint his picture. Behind Vance, his supporters smirked. The colonel's inner circle had ridden his coattails for years, enforcing his will and sharing his views. They formed a wall of institutional power, each protecting the other's secrets. One even pulled out his phone, ready to record whatever humiliation Vance had planned. These moments were currency in their world, traded for favors and silence. Perhaps a more practical lesson, Vance announced, his voice carrying that particular tone that preceded violence. Sometimes subordinates need reminding of their place. Physical reminders. His hand rose in what could charitably be called a training gesture, but looked more like preparation for a slap. The room held its breath. 200 people, suddenly statues. Elena's eyes tracked the movement, calculating distance and force. Her body coiled with potential energy, training suppressed but not forgotten. In that suspended moment, she saw past the uniform to the bully underneath, the same in every culture, every conflict. Men who confused fear with respect, violence with strength. But as whispers spread through the watching crowd, questions hung in the air. Would she break? Or would something else shatter first? When is enough finally enough? Comment below. We all have that moment when silence becomes complicity. Time slowed to crystalline clarity as Colonel Vance's hand descended toward Elena's face. His palm, soft from years of desk duty, carried the weight of institutional arrogance behind it. But something extraordinary happened in that fraction of a second. Elena's body moved with liquid precision, her left hand intercepting his wrist while her right executed a perfect joint lock. The motion was so fast, so economically perfect that most observers saw only the result. Vance's arm bent at an impossible angle, followed by a sound like a branch snapping in winter. The colonel's scream shattered the gymnasium's silence. He dropped to one knee, his face contorting from shock to agony to disbelief. His right arm hung uselessly, the forearm clearly fractured. Elena released him immediately, stepping back with the same calm she'd maintained throughout his tirade. But now something had changed. The mask was off, and what lay beneath was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Enough, Elena said, her voice carrying a command presence that made generals pause. Not loud, not aggressive, just absolute. The single word rippled through the room like a shock wave, rewriting everything observers thought they knew. This wasn't the voice of a desk jockey or supply officer. This was the voice of someone who'd given orders in hell and had them obeyed. The silence that followed was different from the stunned quiet of moments before. This was reverent, almost sacred. 200 people breathed in perfect unison, witnesses to something that would reshape their understanding of power, of strength, of the quiet warriors who walked among them unseen. Elena stood in that silence like a statue carved from marble and moonlight, her chest rising and falling with measured breaths. The afternoon sun streaming through the high windows caught the dust motes dancing around her, creating an almost ethereal halo. For this suspended moment, the weight of revelation hung in the air like incense, and everyone present understood they were experiencing something that would echo through their lives forever. In that stillness, Elena's mind drifted not to combat zones or classified missions, but to a small girl in Ohio who'd once stood up to playground bullies twice her size. Her grandmother's voice echoed across decades. True strength whispers, child. It never needs to shout. The memory brought the faintest smile to her lips, barely visible but profound in its serenity. Then, like morning mist dissipating with the sunrise, the moment passed. For a moment, Elena's mind drifted to Fallujah, 2007. The taste of sand and blood, the weight of decisions that meant life or death. She remembered the moment she'd made her choice, standing over the graves of soldiers she'd led, medals heavy in her hands. These mean nothing if the system that awards them protects predators, she'd whispered to the desert wind. That day, Commander Elena Thorne had disappeared into classified files, and Captain Elena Harper had been born. Impossible, Vance gasped, cradling his ruined arm. His supporters rushed forward but stopped when Elena's gaze swept over them. There was no threat in her posture, no aggression in her stance, but something in her eyes made trained soldiers hesitate. You're nobody. A paper pusher. I've seen your file. You've seen what I allowed you to see, Elena interrupted, her calm more unsettling than any rage. Captain Elena Harper, former commander, Joint Special Operations Task Force 7. 3 tours in Iraq, 4 in Afghanistan. Classified operations in 12 countries you couldn't find on a map. She reached into her pocket, producing a small leather case. Inside, medals gleamed that most soldiers only saw in museums. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, twice. And this, she held up a plain black coin, deep black designation. We don't exist until we choose to. The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Whispers exploded from every corner. Phones appeared despite regulations, recording everything. Special Operations Task Force 7 was legend, ghost stories told in forward operating bases. They were the ones who went where others couldn't, did what others wouldn't. And their commanders were chosen from the absolute elite. Warriors who could think, lead, and when necessary, disappear. But then something unexpected happened. Elena's hand trembled slightly as she returned the medals to her pocket. For just a moment, the weight of what she'd done, breaking years of carefully maintained cover, crashed over her. She'd spent so long being invisible, so long suppressing her true self, that revealing it felt like stepping naked into crossfire. Her breathing hitched, barely noticeable except to those who knew what to look for. Mosul, 2017, she continued, her voice steady despite the internal storm. 17 soldiers trapped in a collapsed building. Enemy fire from 3 directions. I led the extraction team. We saved 15. Her eyes found Master Sergeant Rodriguez in the crowd. You were one of them, Rodriguez. Building 7, Sector 4. You had a sucking chest wound. I carried you out myself. Rodriguez's face went white with recognition. Memories clicked into place. Not the intel officer he'd half remembered, but the ghost who'd materialized from smoke and fire, directing covering fire while dragging wounded soldiers to safety. The commander whose face he'd never clearly seen through the dust and blood, whose name had been redacted from all reports. Tears began streaming down the grizzled sergeant's face, surprising everyone, including himself. Jesus Christ, he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. All these years, I've been trying to find you, to thank you. His composure, built over 20 years of military service, crumbled completely. You saved my life, you saved all our lives, and I stood here and watched him humiliate you. The shame in his voice was palpable, raw with the weight of betrayal. Not intentional, but devastating nonetheless. Rodriguez stepped forward, his massive frame shaking with sobs he could no longer contain. You were just a shadow in the smoke, but I remember your voice. Same voice that's been teaching cadets patience and kindness while we all treated you like nothing." He turned to face the crowd, his tear-streaked face fierce with newfound purpose. "This woman is a hero, a real one. And we let that piece of shit treat her like garbage because we were too blind, too stupid, too cowardly to see. Have you ever discovered that someone you overlooked was actually extraordinary? Share below. Heroes often hide in plain sight." Another flashback seized Elena, the moment she'd decided to infiltrate the system from within. Standing in a Pentagon office, refusing another medal, another promotion. "I can do more good as nobody than as somebody," she'd told the bewildered general. "Let me disappear. Let me serve without the weight of rank or recognition. Let me find the rot from inside." It had taken months to build her new identity, years to position herself where she could observe, document, wait for the right moment. "That's not possible," Vance wheezed, but doubt crept into his voice. Command would have known. "My clearance—" "Your clearance means nothing to people who don't exist," Elena cut him off. "I chose this assignment. Chose to fade into the background, to teach quietly, to serve without recognition, because that's what real warriors do. We serve the mission, not our egos." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "But you crossed a line. Not just today, but every day you've worn that uniform while betraying its values." The psychological shift in the room was palpable. Power structures that seemed immutable suddenly looked fragile. Young female officers stood straighter. Male soldiers who'd participated in or ignored harassment found themselves reevaluating every assumption. The social armor that protected men like Vance began showing cracks. "But why?" Someone called out, a young lieutenant brave enough to voice what everyone wondered. "Why hide? Why let them treat you like nothing?" Elena's expression softened slightly, the warrior facade allowing a glimpse of the teacher beneath. "Because real strength doesn't need display. Because changing a system requires patience, not just force. And because," her eyes swept the room, meeting dozens of gazes, "sometimes people need to see that even heroes can be pushed down. The question is, do we stay down?" As medics finally reached Vance, as his supporters scrambled to control a situation spiraling beyond their influence, as phones captured every second for posterity, the Academy's power structure shuddered. Questions exploded through the crowd. Who was this woman? What other secrets walked among them? And most importantly, what would happen next? The room erupted into chaos. Officers shouted orders that no one followed. Cameras flashed despite regulations. And in the center of it all, Elena Harper stood like the eye of a hurricane, finally visible after years in the shadows. Her secret was out, her cover blown, her mission exposed. But as she looked around at the faces surrounding her, some shocked, some awed, some terrified of what her revelation meant for their own buried secrets, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years: freedom. What would you sacrifice to expose the truth? Comment below, because Elena's story is just beginning, and the real battle starts now.